The idea of defunding police departments is gaining momentum not just across the United States, but in Canada as well. In Toronto, 2 city councillors say they will put forward a motion to slash funding for police of the city's largest operating expense by 10% and redirect the $122 million in savings to community resources. With more, we're joined by Akwasi Owusu-Bempah, a professor of sociology at the University of Toronto. Professor, thank you for being here today. We appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So more than $15 billion were spent on policing across Canada in 2018. Talk to me about what kinds of community resources and organizations should see some of that money if it's redirected to them instead.
Yeah, I think the very organizations, agencies, and institutions that we've been defunding over the past 20 years should be seeing those funds. So we would be talking social welfare services, child welfare services, education, and then it could trickle down as well to community programming, of course. And the big one, a lot of the reason we're having this conversation is around mental health. So the mental health supports that have been cut over the past 20 years, receiving increased funding so that they can deal with issues that the police are currently tackling.
Professor, the concept of defunding the police doesn't necessarily mean abolishing police forces, although that is what some people want to see happen. Ideally, how would the redistribution of funding to community organizations change the function of the police?
Yeah, and I think the distinction you make is an important one because there are calls to abolish the police and there are calls to dismantle and rebuild in different formats. The defunding movement, really, as you note, is first and foremost a reallocation or a reassignment of certain tasks and functions that we recognize that the police aren't performing very well, that there are negative outcomes to their involvement in those activities, such as increased risk for the use of violence and potential for criminalization. And as I've said, a reassignment of those tasks to other agencies, institutions, and organizations, and as well a reallocation of the funds. Now, how do I think we should go about doing this? I would suggest starting by doing an audit of all of the things that we are having the police doing. And so this will definitely look different in different jurisdictions, but one could review calls for service. One could review the budget as it stands, although many police budgets, at least the public ones, aren't very detailed. But we'd want to get an understanding of what the police are doing and identify, as I've said, those roles, functions, tasks that would be better served by other organizations and agencies. So these would be, we don't have them in Toronto anymore, but officers that are in schools. I've recently done some work demonstrating that people who suffer from mental illness, who are housed, so who are formerly homeless and are housed, have a 50% lower chance of experiencing policing in a 90-day period. So just to demonstrate how much those supports can reduce work that the police ultimately have to do, and as we've said, don't necessarily lead to the best outcomes.
Let's keep the focus on mental health, because there was a number that just jumped out at me. The Toronto Police alone responded to about 30,000 mental health calls last year. What effect would you like to see if these calls were instead responded to by mental health professionals with training and de-escalation?
Yeah, precisely. And it's not to say that the police wouldn't have to be present for some of those calls. There may be instances where an individual is posing a serious risk to themselves or to others where we would want the police to be there. A large part of the problem is for individuals who are suffering mental health crises and for those around them, the police are often, the quickest point of contact or seemingly the most sensible resource to call. And so that's the reason that we see such a high number of calls to the police, because we don't have another readily available service, whether that be another number to call with another service attached for individuals and those around them in those situations to call. And, I think when you talk to police officers and even police leaders, they will agree that they're not well equipped to perform that function, and they would like to see some of these roles and responsibilities given to other organizations and agencies.
Professor, this is just the beginning of a very long international conversation, and we were glad to add your voice to it today. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you like this, be sure to subscribe here.
And you can check out more Your Morning videos right here.